The South China Sea dispute involving China and the Philippines. With an international court ruling expected soon, what is China's position? I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. In January 2013, the Philippines unilaterally filed a case against China at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. The issue focuses on a dispute over maritime jurisdiction in the South China Sea. China is not participating in the case, stating it will not accept any solution involving a third-party settlement of its territorial sovereignty and its maritime rights. China has also made it clear that its dispute with the Philippines should be resolved through bilateral talks. Nevertheless, the court is expected to issue a ruling next week. We begin with CCTV correspondent Ho Na, who joins us now from Beijing. And Ho Na, can you tell us more about why the Chinese government is not taking part in this arbitration case and why it says it will not accept the court's ruling?
Well, China said on Thursday the decision of the South China Sea arbitration would not affect its territorial integrity or maritime rights in the South China Sea. China and the Philippines originally reached consensus to settle their dispute over the South China Sea through negotiation, and this consensus is in accordance with the Declaration on the Conduct of the Parties in the South China Sea, known as the DOC, signed by China and ASEAN member states, including the Philippines, in 2002. However, on January the 23rd, 2013, the Philippines unilaterally initiated the arbitration in violation of its agreements with China. So China rejects the court's ruling because the DOC explicitly states that the parties concerned undertake to resolve their territorial and jurisdictional disputes by peaceful means through friendly consultations and negotiations by sovereign states directly concerned, in accordance with the universally recognized principles of international law, including the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as the UNCLOS. The UNCLOS allows for exclusion to arbitration, and in 2006, China made a declaration excluding disputes concerning maritime delimitation, historic bay or titles, military activities, and law enforcement activities. The Philippines went ahead with arbitration without any consultation or negotiations with China. So China says the arbitration cannot be fair because it's illegal. Anand.
Has China gained much international support for its stance on the issue?
Well, some African and European nations and members from international organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the ASEAN have voiced their support of China's stance that such territorial disputes should be handled through bilateral negotiations. With a ruling in the South China Sea arbitration case set to be unveiled next week, an increasing number of countries have echoed China's position, expressing concern about what it calls the expansion and abuse of power of the arbitral tribunal in The Hague. Over 60 countries have voiced support for China, including India, Russia, Kenya, and several regional organizations such as the Arab League. Back to you.
Thank you. That's CCTV's Ho Na reporting from Beijing. And for more perspective, joining me now from Beijing is Zhang Junxi. He is Senior Captain and Vice President for the Naval Research Institute in China, and he's a former Deputy Naval Officer at the Chinese Embassy in the United States. Also with us from Islamabad is Masood Khan. He is the Director and CEO of the Institute of Strategic Studies in Pakistan, and he's a former ambassador to China. With me here in Washington is Saurabh Gupta. He is a Senior Fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. Also joining us from Nairobi is Wilson Muna. He is the Director of Research at the Africa Policy Institute. Welcome to all of you to the show. Zhang Junxi, let me start with you. China has taken a very strong stand on this South China arbitration case. The former Chinese State Councillor Dai Bingguo said at a recent event in Washington, D.C. that on issues of sovereignty, China will never accept any solution that is imposed on it by a third party. And he said that the ruling, and I'm quoting here, will amount to nothing more than a piece of paper. Can you tell us why China is not participating in this arbitration case or accepting the results?
Well, I think China's position accords with international law. First, the essence of the subject matter of the South China Sea arbitration unilaterally initiated by the Philippines is the sovereignty over some maritime features in the South China Sea. We know that territorial sovereignty falls beyond the scope of UNCLOS. That means the arbitral tribunal has no jurisdiction over this case. This is the first. And second, that China, as a sovereign state, has the right to choose the dispute settlement method. So without the consent of China, the Philippines unilaterally initiated the arbitration. That means it deprives China of the right, according to the international law, of choosing a dispute settlement regime. And there are some other reasons that we won't agree with the Philippines.
Right, Zhang Junxi, China has also expressed another concern. It has cautioned against countries in the region using arbitration as an excuse to take provocative action. Is there a possibility that there could be escalating tensions or instability in the region as a result of this?
I'm afraid that some country may use the award of the arbitration as an excuse to meddle in the South China Sea. We know that before 2009, when the United States adopted the new strategy of rebalancing the Asia-Pacific, I think the situation in the South China Sea was, generally speaking, was stable. All the claimants in the South China Sea dispute maintained or exercised great restraint, and the situation had been calm. But in recent years, when the United States came back to Asia, it used the South China Sea dispute as an excuse to interfere in the South China Sea. In the South China Sea. So we are not sure that whether the United States will take the award as an excuse to meddle in the South China Sea issue.
Ambassador Khan, China's stance on the dispute in the South China Sea is to, quote, remain committed to a peaceful resolution through negotiations and consultations with those involved directly. What is Pakistan's view on that?
Pakistan has supported China's stance openly in the international forums and also in the regional fora. But we also believe that other countries in the region, the ASEAN countries, or even the United States of America, they also want a peaceful resolution of the disputes. China's stance is that it's a sovereignty issue, but there are some disputes which can be resolved bilaterally, and there has been some arrangement of sorts with ASEAN countries, with other claimants and disputants. And I think that that would be a wiser course of action, because we think that the entire South China Sea dispute or disputes should not be allowed to escalate the situation. And the United States-China relationship, which is multidimensional, and they have a strategic and economic dialogue to promote this relationship, should not be reduced to the South China Sea issues.
Sohrab, let's look at the role of the United States in this. The United States is not a claimant in the region, nor is it a signatory to UNCLOS, that's the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So why is the United States supporting the Philippines in this arbitration case, and why is it asking China to accept the ruling?
The United States is supporting the Philippines in this arbitration case from the context of supporting international law more broadly. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and maritime law generally is still fairly young and in its developing phase. The United States would prefer that all countries which sign, or even if they do not sign these agreements, but adhere to international customary law in the area in the maritime sphere, adhere to those agreements so that there is good order at sea and peaceful order at sea, and that these matters can be resolved without the use of force or the threat of use of force. That having been said, I mean, the most important missing factor out here is the United States' own signature and ratification to the UNCLOS Treaty. Over and above that, frankly, the United States' interests in the South China Sea are fairly limited. And when I talk interests, I talk in terms of its navigational interests. It has defense obligations, but those obligations also are fairly marginal compared to the obligations in Northeast Asia.
Its navigation interests have not been interfered with.
Absolutely not. Frankly, this is the ironic factor. Commercial navigation has never been interfered going back decades. And in terms of military navigation, China's position on military navigation in the South China Sea is no different from any of the other claimants in the South China Sea, or frankly, practically all the littoral states of Asia and the Asia Pacific. So in that regard, China does not stand out as an objectionable factor in any regard. China is just same as the other countries. So overall, navigation has not been impeded in any way whatsoever, and the possibility that it would is marginal, if not totally absent, simply because China is the single largest trading power and it uses the seas for its own purposes and interests.
Zhang Junshi, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman, noted that China's stance on this arbitration case helps, and I'm quoting here again, safeguard the dignity and authority of international law. There was also a recent commentary piece in Xinhua, the Chinese news agency, which noted that China is defending not only its territorial sovereignty, but world peace and stability when fighting against the obstinacy displayed in the South China Sea arbitration. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, just as I have said a moment ago, that the reason why China takes a stance neither to accept nor to take part in the arbitration. First is that the arbitral has no jurisdiction over this case. The second, China has the right to choose dispute settlement regime. Third, China and the Philippines have agreed to peacefully settle the dispute through negotiations and consultations. And this promise has been made in at least 5 agreements between the governments of China and the Philippines, and also made in DOC, the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, in 2002. China and the Philippines both signed the declaration. The declaration stipulates that all the South China Sea disputes should be settled peacefully through consultations and negotiations. So actually, by initiating the arbitration, the Philippines is breaking its promise and also is breaking the law. The third, I think China has made an announcement to exclude itself from the compulsory arbitration like this concerning maritime delimitation and other issues. So actually the arbitral tribunal is against the international law. So China chooses the stance not to participate nor accept this case.
Okay, we are going to have to take a short break right now. We will have much more on the South China Sea dispute when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to the show as we continue our discussion on the South China Sea dispute involving China and the Philippines. Let's get back to our panel. Zhang Junshi, the new Philippines president, Rodrigo Duterte, he says that his country would be ready to hold talks with China to avoid any kind of conflict on this Hague verdict. Do you think that China and the Philippines can reach a solution through bilateral negotiations, regardless of what the arbitration panel says?
Well, actually, China has been advocating that all the disputes in the South China Sea should be peacefully settled through friendly consultations and negotiations between the parties directly concerned. But the Philippines government initiated the arbitration by itself, and China doesn't agree. So after the award of the arbitration is issued, I think China and the Philippines should come back together, and the Philippines should return to the negotiation table with China Actually, China has settled its land boundary issues with 12 out of its 14 neighbors. And also we have settled the maritime delimitation issue with Vietnam in the Beibu Gulf. So this shows that negotiations is the best way to settle the disputes between countries. And no matter what the award is, China will not accept. China hopes to start or to resume talks with the Philippines on the South China Sea issue. And I'm sure in the end, the two countries will reach a good result on settling the disputes.
Ambassador Khan, there are dozens of countries which support China in this South China Sea dispute. Among those countries is Cambodia, whose Prime Minister has said that the upcoming decision is, quote, politically motivated. How important is this show of support from ASEAN countries for China, or for that matter, support from Russia?
Well, I think support from Russian Federation in Cambodia is very important, both symbolically and substantively, because Cambodia is a member of ASEAN, and a dissenting voice sends out a very strong signal, and Moscow is very important in this equation. I mean, of course, it matters what Kenya says or what Pakistan says, what other countries are saying, what the supporters or detractors are saying, or the opponents are saying. But what is more important is peace and stability in the region, because the United States and China are two major powers. They are interdependent economically. On almost all strategic decisions, they have to consult each other. And therefore, as I said earlier, that their differences or their relationship should not be reduced to the South China Sea. Both, we know, are capable of defending each other, but both are also very important, vital for promoting peace and stability in the region. China, as you know, has launched this mega initiative, which is called One Belt, One Road, which tries to connect regions, and that includes ASEAN region also. ASEAN region with the whole of East Asia and with the rest of the world, particularly Africa. Given that bigger picture, I would say that all parties concerned, including the Philippines, should try to sort out their problems bilaterally with Beijing, and because that is the only viable path as far as the anticipated award of the PCA, or Permanent Court of Arbitration, is concerned. That would not be accepted by China. China has made it clear. So what we need to avoid right now is build-up in the South China Sea region, because there's already a lot of build-up. You were asking this question, whether there would be escalation. I think there's already some escalation in the run-up to the decision, and steps should be taken to de-escalate the situation, because if you listen to President Barack Obama or President Xi Jinping, when they meet at the summit level, they say that they want to promote their relations and they want to reduce the divergences and differences that they have. And therefore, because if there's a volatility in South China Sea, that would not remain confined to that area. That would affect and infect the entire globe, and therefore it is the responsibility not only of these two major powers but also regional powers to de-escalate the situation and move towards interdependence, move towards win-win solutions. And a win-win solution in this context would necessitate that there are bilateral channels open to resolve these disputes that they have, and all the states have inherited them from history.
Sohrab, you noted in an article that you wrote that UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, makes no demand that an entitlement or delimitation question be determined by legal action, only that such issues be resolved peacefully. And of course, China has already said that arbitration will not solve the dispute. Is negotiation still the best option open?
It is easily the best option open. I say it in the context of this particular arbitration case. The most contested elements in this arbitration case pertain to China's activities in the southern sector of the South China Sea, which is near the Spratlys Islands. These relate to fishing, mineral rights, land reclamation, law enforcement issues, etc., etc. What is very, very in the arbitral verdict is that the arbitrators will find that they do not have jurisdiction to render a decision on those issues. What we will then see is 3 years of bitter rhetoric which has disturbed the harmony of the South China Sea, at the end of which these important underlying issues are still open and still a matter of contestation. The president of the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea last week had observed that increasingly judicial fora are being used for political purposes, not for legal and the judicial reasons that they need to be used for to create clarification. They're being used politically, and that does not help the process. It hurts the process. You know, China opted out from delimitation at the time of signing UNCLOS. What the Philippines craftily did was essentially ask the court to rule on entitlements in the South China Sea, but that was a backdoor approach to actually gaining a delimitation in the South China Sea. It was what is termed as lawfare. And after the court verdict, we have seen China get very engaged in things like reclamations, etc., etc. Those are all within China's legal rights. So China also thereafter went and took actions which were within the scope of its legal rights entirely, but which also had a destabilizing effect. So you see, lawfare against lawfare, where no solution is ultimately rendered, is a means for just bitter tensions and polarization. The two countries have to sit together and do this consensually, because at the end of this day, this is between China and Philippines. No other country has enforcement power in this case, whatever the decision be, and therefore, even if the award in some respects goes in Philippines where it does not have the enforcement capacity, it necessarily needs to sit across the table, and that's why President Duterte's willingness to talk on these lines is very, very encouraging.
Okay. Zhang Junxi, there was a recent commentary in Xinhua, the Chinese news agency, which warned that this ruling could cause long-term damage in the region, and that commentary said, quote, among other things, that the arbitral tribunal in The Hague risks opening a Pandora's box at sea which could have dangerous consequences. So the question is, what can China do to downplay this noise and this Western propaganda and to keep promoting through bilateral and multilateral talks within the framework of ASEAN?
Well, China has actually advocated the dual-track approach to settling the South China Sea issue. On one hand, China wants to peacefully resolve the South China Sea dispute with parties directly concerned. On the other hand, China wants to maintain peace and stability with ASEAN countries. In the future, I think that China will and is ready to start talks, negotiations, and consultations with other claimants in the South China Sea dispute, including the Philippines, the Vietnamese, and other parties. I think this is the best way and only way to settle the South China Sea issue. And the outside powers should support the joint effort by China and other claimants to peacefully settle the dispute. I think both China and the United States share the common interest in maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea and also in the Asia-Pacific region. And we hope that the United States will support the joint efforts by China and other countries in this region to peacefully resolve their disputes. And also, we call for ASEAN countries to jointly maintain the peace and stability in this region. If we don't have some disputes with other countries, and they show their support for maintaining peace and stability in this region. I think this is a dual-track approach, and it is initially initiated by some of the ASEAN countries.
Wilson, what is Kenya's view on bilateral negotiations, on talks to resolve this dispute?
Yeah, I think Kenya's view is that these talks must be done peacefully and must be done within the international legal framework, and which they think that China has a very good understanding of that process. So in this case, they think that the interested parties and claimants should actually first of all sit down and have a talk with, on a round table and be able to come up with a solution. The Kenyan, I think, in this case, the Kenyan government is aligning itself with that view because it is concerned that if this issue escalates into something that is more, or maybe you can say undesirable, in terms of escalation of peace and stability in that region, it would hamper a lot the relationship between the two, especially for Kenya, which largely depend on China for its development assistance.
Ambassador Khan, China has said that it will not take part in this arbitration process, nor will it accept the results of the arbitration process. Given that, does this move by China in any way undermine its commitment to international law, in your view?
Not at all. China has argued out its case very convincingly, very compellingly. And their government officials and their commentators and legal experts have been defining China's position. In fact, they've said that they did not accept this referral to the PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And second, that their rejection of this referral is on the basis of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So they have not transgressed or they have not violated any of the clauses of the Law of the Sea. Second thing is that since China has rejected it, it would not be legally operative or binding on China because it has already made its intention very clear and it did not sit through the proceedings of the PCA. So when the award is delivered, China is not bound by international law to abide by it. That said, I think that, as you said earlier, that there are political dimensions to this issue. There are also legal aspects. But the bigger reality is that all the states of the region, that includes China, ASEAN countries, and the United States also has legitimate interests in the region. They have to work out solutions which are sustainable. And legal quibbling or legal fighting or contestation is not a satisfactory solution to a very, very complex issue.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And we'd like to continue the conversation on social media. Give us your thoughts and your comments on our Facebook page. You'll find that at CCTV America. I'm Arlen Dido in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.